When you bury the love of your life alone, something inside you dies too, but something else wakes up. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I never thought I would be the only man standing in a church meant for hundreds. Yet that morning, the pews were empty except for me and Father Doyle, whose voice echoed through the high beams like a ghost trapped in the rafters. Margaret's coffin rested at the front, a pale oak box polished to a shine she would have liked. The organ hummed out a slow hymn, but there was no chorus to carry it, just the wind sneaking through the old stained-glass window and the creak of wood that answered every word of prayer. I stared at the space where my son and daughter should have been. 2 neat rows of polished benches sat untouched, no coats, no handbags, no trace of flowers from anyone named Grant. The silence was heavier than grief. It was proof. Proof that love, if stretched too thin, eventually tears apart. Father Doyle spoke kindly, as he always did. He said Margaret had the patience of a saint. I wanted to laugh at that. Patience? Maybe. But she was also the kind of woman who never asked for much. And maybe that was the problem. People who ask for nothing are easy to forget. When the service ended, I walked behind the casket as it was lowered into the ground. The cold bit through my coat, and somewhere far off, a bell rang from another funeral. Someone luckier than me, I supposed. Someone whose family still remembered what respect looked like. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the night Margaret went into the hospital and never came home. The tears dried up with the years of disappointment, each one another small betrayal from the children we raised to be better than us. After the last handful of soil hit the coffin, Father Doyle touched my shoulder. "You're not alone, Edward," he said softly. I nodded, though I knew better. The house was too quiet when I got home. Margaret's teacup still sat on the counter where she left it weeks ago. The scent of her lavender soap lingered in the bathroom. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and told myself not to check, but of course I did. On Facebook, David had posted a picture from a golf course in Connecticut. Great day with the guys closing a new deal soon. His wife Monica smiled beside him, holding a champagne glass. Not a word about his mother. Lily's post came next. Brunch at some rooftop place in Boston. 5 friends, mimosas, smiles too white to be real. Her caption read, "Self-Care Sunday. Surround yourself with positive energy." Positive energy. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the black screen. For a long time, I didn't see a father, or even a man. Just the outline of someone who had spent 72 years giving everything away: money, time, forgiveness, and gotten silence in return. The phone stayed still. No calls, no condolences. Just the steady tick of the wall clock counting down the minutes until the next disappointment. I tried to make dinner the way Margaret used to pot roast with carrots, but halfway through I forgot the seasoning. The house smelled of salt and nothing else. I turned off the stove, sat down again, and looked around. Every picture frame told the same lie. 4 people smiling, pretending to be a family. I remember the last Thanksgiving we were all together. David talked about investments. Lily scrolled her phone under the table. Margaret had cooked for 12, though only 4 showed up. When she asked David to say grace, he said, "You do it, Mom. You're the one who still believes." It was rather. She laughed. But I saw the flicker in her eyes, the tiny wound he didn't notice. I should have said something then. Instead, I poured him more wine and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That's the thing about getting old. You keep choosing peace until one day you realize peace was just another word for surrender. After dinner, or whatever that half-cooked meal was, I walked out to the porch. The sun had dipped behind the maples, and the lake below the hill shimmered like steel. Margaret used to sit here at dusk, knitting, waiting for the porch light to flicker on. She'd say, "When that light goes out, it's time to rest." The bulb was still burning. I left it on. Across the lake, a loon cried out, long and mournful. I thought about calling David again, maybe just to tell him the service went fine, but the words felt useless. He would say he was busy. He always was. Lily would text later, maybe send a heart emoji, maybe not. Inside, the television played a rerun of Jeopardy. Margaret loved that show. I turned the volume low and sat in her recliner. The leather was cracked from years of her sitting there, humming under her breath. My eyes fell on the family group chat still open on my phone. Grant family updates. The last message was Margaret's 6 months ago, reminding everyone of David's birthday dinner. I scrolled through the silence that followed, months of nothing but read receipts. Then I pressed and held the group name until the option appeared. Delete conversation. For a second, I hesitated. Then I hit delete. The screen blinked once and turned blank. I whispered into the empty room. From now on, I'll keep my own company. The house didn't answer, but the floorboards groaned softly beneath my feet, as if they understood. It was a few days after the funeral when I finally opened the drawer in my desk, the one Margaret used to call the drawer of good intentions. Inside were old bank statements, yellowed receipts, and a folder marked David, Startup. I hadn't looked at it in years. 20 years ago, David had called me late one night, his voice full of that desperate optimism young men have before the world teaches them manners. "Dad, I've got a great idea," he said. An app that connects local contractors to homeowners. Everyone's doing it online now. All I need is a small investment to get started. Margaret and I had just paid off our mortgage. She was worried about our retirement, about Medicare, about how I'd been coughing in my sleep. But I told her, if we don't believe in our own son, who will? We took $50,000 out of our savings. It was supposed to be a loan, but somewhere along the way, the word loan disappeared. So did the business. A few years later, Lily came to us in tears. She said she couldn't afford her last semester of design school. We wrote another check, then another, tuition, apartment, car repairs, rent. She promised she'd pay us back as soon as she got on her feet. I stopped waiting for that day a long time ago. Back then, we told ourselves we were doing what any good parents would do, giving them a head start. Now, sitting at my desk with the funeral pamphlet still lying beside the bills, I realized we hadn't given them a head start. We'd given them permission to forget what struggle felt like. I took out my notebook, the one where I recorded every expense since Margaret got sick, page after page, all neat and careful. Hospital co-pays, groceries, gas for the truck, prescriptions. Then, hidden between them, notes that made my stomach twist, transfers to David, Venmo payments to Lily, a down payment listed as helping the kids. I did the math. $98,000 gone in 7 years, almost everything we'd planned to live on in our old age. I sat back, listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock through the wall. Margaret used to say that clock sounded comforting, like a heartbeat. Now it just sounded like a countdown. Around noon, I stepped outside for air. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the crunch of salt under my shoes. Across the street, Mrs. June was feeding the birds. She was in her late 70s, always wearing the same purple cardigan, her white hair pinned with a silver clip. "Afternoon, Ed," she called out. "Haven't seen you at bingo lately." "Been busy," I said, though busy wasn't the right word. She nodded, threw another handful of seeds. "I read about your wife in the church bulletin. I'm sorry, dear." "Thank you." She studied me for a moment, squinting. "You know, I used to think getting old was about peace," she said. "Turns out it's about realizing who still remembers your phone number." I gave her a small smile, but she wasn't done. "You think they'll visit you because they love you," she added, voice sharp as the winter air. "They visit because they need your checkbook." The words hit like a slap, not cruel, just true. She turned to go back inside. "You're a good man, Ed. But good men get drained dry if they don't learn to close the tap." I stood there long after her door shut, the wind stinging my face. Back inside, I made a pot of coffee and sat down again at the desk. The smell filled the room, bitter and familiar. I remembered Margaret standing by the counter, pouring her cream, saying, "Don't forget to sweeten it, Ed. Life's bitter enough." I reached for another folder, labeled Cabin. That small place by the lake had been our dream escape, built with my own hands the year we retired. We used to spend summers there, just the two of us, fishing and reading by the water. The last time we went was before she got sick. I opened the file expecting old utility bills or the deed. Instead, I found a letter from the bank, dated 3 weeks ago. The subject line froze me in place. Notice of possible foreclosure. Delinquent payment. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Then I read the fine print. The mortgage wasn't under my name alone. Somehow, David's name had been added as a cosigner, and he'd used the property as collateral for one of his business loans. The paper trembled in my hand. I could almost hear Margaret's voice again, the way she'd say my name when she was disappointed but didn't want to sound angry. I went to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and stared out the window. Snow was falling in slow spirals, covering the garden she once tended. How do you measure failure? In dollars, or in the silence between phone calls? I thought of David, of how proud I used to be when he wore his first suit, of Lily, running across the yard in her art school scarf, waving a sketchbook like it was a ticket to freedom. Maybe we'd done too good a job at loving them. Maybe we'd made it too easy for them to forget what love costs. I'd spent most of my life believing that money didn't define love. But love without respect, that was poverty of another kind. I stared at the phone for nearly an hour before I finally picked it up and called David. It rang so long I almost hung up. Then his voice came on, smooth, cheerful, too bright for a man who had just lost his mother. "Hey, Dad, how are you holding up?" "How am I holding up?" I said quietly. "Your mother was buried 3 days ago. Maybe you should be the one answering that question." There was a pause, short but heavy. "Yeah, I meant to come, Dad. I really did. Things just got out of hand here. The investors are breathing down my neck. It's been chaos." "It's not a machina." "The investors," I repeated, letting the words sit like stones on my tongue. "Is that what you use the cabin for? To impress your investors?" Another silence, then a forced laugh. "It's just temporary, Dad. You know I'll fix it." "Your mother's body isn't even cold," I said. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't pull them back. "Mom wouldn't want you to stress over money," he replied. His tone had that patronizing edge people use when they think you're too old to understand. "You've got enough on your plate. Let me handle it." I closed my eyes. "You mean let you handle my house, my savings, and whatever's left of my dignity? Come on, Dad, don't make it sound like that. It's family. Family helps each other out." "Family shows up," I said. "Family doesn't skip funerals for golf tournaments." He sighed loudly. "Here we go again. You always think the worst of me. I'm just trying to make things work so you don't have to worry in your old age." I wanted to shout, to tell him I'd been worrying in my old age since the day he first borrowed money and forgot to return it. But shouting wouldn't change a thing. David was too good at talking over the noise of guilt. "David," I said finally, "your mother loved that cabin. That was her peace. If you've dragged her memory into one of your business deals, you've already lost more than money." "Do-esque." "Dad, please don't make this dramatic. It's not like that." But it was exactly like that. We both sat in silence for a few seconds that felt longer than the 20 years between us. Then I heard a muffled voice in the background, "Monica." Probably. David said something to her, his tone casual, as if I wasn't even on the line. That was when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was who he'd become. "I've got to run, Dad," he said. "Let's talk later, okay?" "Sure," I said. "We'll talk later." Then the line went dead, leaving me with that familiar hum of nothingness. I set the phone down and looked at the framed photo on the shelf. It was taken 15 years ago, at Christmas. Margaret stood in the middle, smiling in that patient way of hers. David had his arm slung around my shoulder, and Lily was holding her first sketchbook. I'd believed back then that we'd done something right, that love would keep us together even when life got hard. Looking at it now, I didn't see a family. I saw a collection of debts, emotional and financial, all unpaid. I walked to the living room and turned off the lamp. The house looked smaller in the dim light, like it had shrunk to match the size of my trust. Margaret once said that kindness was like fire. You could warm a house with it, but if you weren't careful, it burned everything down. Maybe I'd let it burn too long. The phone buzzed again. For a second, I thought it was David, but it wasn't. "Hey, Grandpa." The voice was young, unsure. "Ethan." "Hi, buddy," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "How are you?" "I'm okay. Mom said she texted you about Grandma's. You know, but you were busy?" "Your mom said that?" I asked, trying not to sound surprised. "Yeah. She said you were resting and didn't want company. I told her that doesn't sound like you." I smiled despite the ache in my chest. "You're right. That doesn't sound like me." Ethan hesitated. I just wanted to check on you. Grandma used to tell me you like company more than rest. I swallowed hard. She was right again. He laughed softly, and for a moment I could almost hear Margaret's voice in his. The same warmth, the same pause, before a joke. Grandpa, he said, Mom said maybe we can come by next weekend. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. Cool. I'll bring the pancakes mix. Grandma's recipe, remember? Yeah, I whispered. I remember. End quote. So, when he hung up, I stayed there a while, phone in hand. The silence felt different this time, not empty, just fragile. Somewhere outside, a car drove past, its headlights flashing across the window. The light caught the edge of my desk, and for the first time in years, I noticed the old lockbox Margaret had given me when we made our first will. I walked over, brushed off the dust, and lifted the lid. Inside were the old documents, our joint will, insurance forms, and the letter from our lawyer. The ink had faded, but the names hadn't. David Grant and Lily Grant, co-heirs to everything we'd built. I stared at those names for a long time. Then I whispered, "Not anymore." I closed the lid, locked it, and slid it into the top drawer of my desk. The weight of it felt heavier than gold. For the first time in 15 years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The morning I drove into town, the snow had turned to slush, gray and heavy on the sides of the road. The heater in my old Ford barely worked, and the windshield wipers squeaked like they were protesting every movement. Main Street was half empty, as it usually was on weekdays, with the same old coffee shop where Margaret and I used to stop after church. I could almost see her through the window, sipping her tea and smiling at me over her glasses. When I pulled into the parking lot of Reed & Associates, I sat there for a long minute with the engine running. The building hadn't changed in 20 years. White brick, green awning, a flagpole that hadn't flown a flag in months. Thomas Reed had been our lawyer since before David was born. We used to call him Tommy back then. Inside, the receptionist looked up with polite surprise. "Mr. Grant, it's been a while. How are you?" "Older," I said, forcing a smile. "Is Thomas in?" She nodded and led me down the hall. The smell of coffee and printer ink filled the air. The carpet had the same faded pattern I remembered from the 90 seconds. When Thomas walked out of his office, he looked exactly how I expected. Gray hair, same sharp blue eyes, but a little more tired around the edges. "Ed Grant," he said warmly, holding out his hand. "You old fox. Haven't seen you since your 50th anniversary." "That was a lifetime ago," I said. He glanced at me for a beat too long, reading between the lines the way only old friends can. "Come in, Ed." His office was lined with law books and framed degrees. On the corner of his desk sat a photo of him and his wife at their daughter's wedding. For a moment, I wondered if she'd come to his funeral when that time came, or if she'd be too busy, like my children. Thomas sat across from me, clasping his hands. "So, what brings you in today?" I let out a slow breath. "I buried my wife last week." His face softened. "I read about it in the paper. I'm sorry, Ed. She was a good woman. She was better than I deserved." I looked down at my hands. "And my kids didn't show up." He stayed silent. That was one thing I'd always appreciated about Thomas. He knew when not to fill the silence. I went on. "They've been borrowing money for years. Promises, excuses, always just one more favor. I thought I was helping them build their lives. But I was just digging my own grave." Thomas leaned back. "You're not the first father to find himself in that spot, but you might be one of the few brave enough to do something about it." I gave a dry laugh. "Brave isn't the word I'd use. Stupid, maybe. Late, definitely." He opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me what you want to do." I hesitated, then said, "I want to change my will." Thomas's pen stopped mid-air. "Go on." "I don't want David or Lily to get a dime. Not the house, not the cabin, not the savings. I want it all placed in a trust fund for Ethan. He's the only one who still remembers how to knock before walking in." Thomas nodded slowly. "You're sure about this? Sure enough to drive here on icy roads?" He scribbled notes as I talked details about the properties, the accounts, the insurance policies Margaret and I had built together. Each word felt like a confession, and each confession lightened something in my chest. After a while, Thomas looked up. "You don't need revenge, Ed," he said. "You need boundaries." "Maybe boundaries are the only revenge left for people like us," I replied. He smiled faintly. I like that. We sat for a while in that still office, the kind of silence that carried respect instead of awkwardness. I told him about the funeral, the empty pews, the Facebook posts, the way David talked about investors while his mother was being lowered into the ground. Thomas didn't interrupt. He just listened, the way a man listens when he's heard too many stories like this one. Finally, he said, you'd be surprised how many parents end up here. You think love is enough, and then one day, you find out love without consequences just turns into permission. That line stayed with me. It sounded like something Margaret would have said. He began typing, fingers steady on the keyboard. The printer hummed to life, spitting out sheets of paper that would, in a few minutes, decide the fate of everything I'd worked for. As he typed, he said quietly, You know, I handled a case last year. Father in his 80s. His son forged his signature, took out loans against his house. By the time we caught it, the man had already lost his property. I looked up sharply. Forged it? His own father's? Thomas nodded, eyes sad. Yeah, people will do things you'd never believe when they think no one's watching. I stared at the document on the desk, the legalese blurring in my vision. Suddenly, I could picture David's name on one of those forms, bold and confident, written in the same careless handwriting that used to sign birthday cards. Thomas slid the papers toward me. This is just the draft. We can make it official once you've reviewed it. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled a little maybe the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The tip touched the paper, and for a second, I heard Margaret's voice again. Do what gives you peace, Ed. I drew the first line of my signature, slow, deliberate, final. When I looked up, Thomas was watching me quietly. That's a firm hand, he said. It's the last thing I've got left to be firm about, I told him. And with that, I signed the rest. It was early evening when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, like someone testing whether they were still welcome. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Lily stood there, smiling too brightly for a house still in mourning. She held a pie tin wrapped in aluminum foil, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the doorway. Hi, Dad, she said, stepping inside before I could answer. I baked something for you. Well, technically, I bought it from Perkins. But it's the thought that counts, right? I nodded slowly. Right. The last time Lily had been in this house was over a year ago. I remembered it clearly because she'd spent the entire visit on her phone, complaining about her hairdresser and the price of gas. Now, as she walked through the living room, her heels clicking against the wood, she glanced at the framed photos as if rediscovering old artifacts. You've kept the place nice, she said, scanning the shelves. Smells nostalgic. Smells like old coffee and dust, I replied. She laughed too loudly. You always did have a way with words. We ended up in the kitchen. She placed the pie on the counter and opened a cabinet without asking, taking out 2 plates. Margaret's plates, white porcelain with tiny blue flowers. I almost told her to stop, but something inside me wanted to see how far she'd go, pretending everything was normal. So, she began, slicing the pie. How have you been holding up? I poured 2 glasses of water, watching her from the corner of my eye. I've had better weeks. I know, Dad. Losing Mom like that. I can't even imagine. She paused, pressing a fork into the pie crust. You're all I have left, you know. I studied her face. Her tone was soft, her eyes glassy, but I'd seen her perform enough times to know when she was acting. Is that so? I asked. Of course, she said quickly. David's busy all the time, and honestly, you're the only one who really gets me. She smiled again, but her hand trembled slightly as she picked up her fork. Anyway, I thought maybe I could stop by more often. You shouldn't be alone, Dad. The word alone landed heavy in the air, like a trap she hoped I'd step into. Kind of you, I said, but I've gotten used to the quiet. She leaned back, brushing imaginary crumbs from her sleeve. Still, it's not healthy. Staying by yourself. Maybe we can figure something out. You know, something practical. Like your finances. There it was. I looked down at my plate, at the untouched slice of pie, then back at her. My finances? She blinked, all innocence. I just mean, making sure you're comfortable. You've always done so much for us. It's time we helped you for a change. I could have laughed. Helped me? Yeah, she continued. Like maybe we should take care of the bills, or if you ever feel overwhelmed, David and I can look into managing things for you, just to ease your mind. Would you still love me? I asked quietly. If there was nothing left to take? Her fork froze midair. The smile faltered, only for a second. Then it returned, practiced and sweet. Dad, why would you say something like that? Just wondering, I said. It's been on my mind lately. This doled. She sighed, giving a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. You've always been dramatic. I'm just trying to help. Of course you are. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She started talking again, faster this time about her new highlights. A weekend trip to Cape Cod, a birthday brunch she was planning for a friend named Clara. I nodded when it seemed polite, my mind drifting back to another dinner years ago. Margaret had been washing dishes while Lily, much younger then, sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. Margaret had turned to me and whispered, "If kindness becomes your weakness, they'll call it your duty." Back then, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. I looked across the table at Lily, the soft kitchen light glinting off her gold earrings, and I realized how much she looked like her mother, but none of the warmth had survived the translation. She finished her pie, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and said, "You know, Dad, you could come stay with me for a while. My place is small, but cozy. I could clear out the guest room." I smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful." She seemed relieved. "Really? I mean, it just makes sense. I worry about you here all alone. And honestly, the house is so big. Must be hard to manage everything." "It's manageable," I said. "Still, maybe it's time to think about the future," she pressed. "You know, make sure things are secure." I stood up to clear the plates. "The future's been on my mind a lot lately," I said. "And it's more secure than you think." She watched me carefully. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just that I've been making a few adjustments. Cleaning up old paperwork, setting some things straight." Her lips parted, curiosity flickering. "Paperwork? Like financial stuff?" I turned to the sink, rinsing the plates under the water. "Something like that." Hesno did nose. When I looked over my shoulder, she was glancing around the room again, her gaze lingering on the desk near the window, where I'd left some documents stacked neatly earlier that day. I dried my hands slowly. "You always were nosy," I said, half joking. She laughed too quickly. "Just making sure you're not drowning in forms and taxes, Dad." I smiled. "Don't worry. I've got everything under control." "Oh." For the rest of the evening, she tried to steer the conversation back to safe ground, talking about TV shows, traffic, anything but what she really wanted to ask. I played along, pouring her coffee, nodding in all the right places, pretending to be the same old man she thought she could read. But I wasn't that man anymore. When the clock hit 9, she stood up, slipping her phone into her purse. "I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow." I walked her to the door. She kissed my cheek lightly, a gesture so mechanical it almost made me laugh. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "I'll be here," I said. As she walked down the steps, I watched her silhouette disappear into the night. I was about to close the door when I caught sight of something, her reflection on the window pane, just before she reached her car. She turned back toward the house, holding up her phone, angling it slightly toward the window where my desk sat. A soft flash lit up the glass. She thought she was being clever. I smiled, not out of bitterness but something colder, sharper. "You're too late," I murmured. I woke up to the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Through the thin curtains, I could make out a silver SUV parked beside the old maple tree. David's car. My first thought was that something had happened, maybe a sudden change of heart after all these years of indifference. But when I saw the way Monica stepped out first, clutching a manila folder and whispering to David before they approached the porch, I knew better. The knock came soft, almost polite. I didn't rush. I poured myself a cup of coffee first, took a sip, and let them wait a few seconds longer than necessary. When I finally opened the door, both of them were smiling, the kind of smiles people wear when they've already rehearsed the conversation. "Dad," David began, his voice smooth, too careful. "We were just in the area. Thought we'd stop by." "In the area?" I asked, glancing at their coats, the matching scarves, the untouched car seats. "You live 2 hours away." He laughed weakly. Well, figured we'd check in. Monica baked muffins. Monica lifted the paper bag in her hand, giving a shy nod. Blueberry, your favorite. I stepped aside and let them in. The house felt suddenly smaller with them inside, their perfume and cologne mixing into something foreign. David looked around, noting the tidy kitchen, the folder of papers on my desk, the coffee mug beside it. He smiled again. You've been busy, huh? Always something to do, I said. We sat at the table. Monica unpacked the muffins, setting them neatly on a plate like she'd seen in some magazine. David leaned forward, elbows on the table, that gentle, patronizing tone slipping out like oil. Dad, we've been worried about you. I bet you have, I said, sipping my coffee. I mean it, he pressed. You're alone now, and the bills, the taxes, the maintenance. It's a lot for someone your age. Monica and I thought maybe we could help. Help, I repeated slowly. That word's getting popular lately. He chuckled uneasily, glancing at Monica, who nodded as if on cue. We just want to make sure things don't get overwhelming. You've always been independent, but maybe it's time to let someone else handle the details. You shouldn't have to worry about paperwork and numbers. Paperwork, I said, leaning back in my chair. You mean the same kind of paperwork that keeps disappearing from my desk? His smile flickered. Dad, come on. Let's not make this awkward. I'm not the one making it awkward, son. He sighed, reached into his jacket, and pulled out the manila folder I'd noticed earlier. He placed it on the table gently, as though it were a gift. What's that? I asked, though I already knew. It's just something simple, he said. A power of attorney document. It gives us temporary authority to handle bills and property stuff on your behalf. You'd still be in charge. Of course, it just helps us help you. Monica kept her eyes down, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I didn't touch the folder. You want control, not care. David's jaw tightened. We're protecting you from mistakes. My only mistake, I said evenly, was trusting you. He exhaled sharply, trying to maintain his composure. Dad, we're not the enemy here. You're grieving, and maybe you're not thinking clearly. This is for your own good. My own good, I repeated, feeling a low burn rise in my chest. That's what people always say before they take something that isn't theirs. Monica finally spoke, her voice small. Edward, please. He's just trying to make things easier. I turned to her. Easier for who? Silence filled the room. The old clock on the wall ticked louder with each passing second. David slid the document toward me. Just sign it, Dad. It's not a big deal. I looked at his hands, smooth, manicured, the hands of a man who'd never fixed a roof, never cleaned a gutter, never stayed up all night waiting for a fever to break. Those were my hands once, before life burned the softness out of them. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I pushed the folder back toward him, slow and deliberate. You should leave. Maydes. Dad, now. He blinked, caught off guard. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. Monica reached out, touching his arm gently, a silent plea not to push further. David stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first, I said. But this time, it's mine to make. He clenched his jaw, grabbed the folder, and shoved it under his arm. Fine. But don't come crying when things fall apart. I smiled faintly. Things already did, and... He turned toward the door. Monica lingered for a moment, her eyes glossy with something between shame and sorrow. I'm sorry, she whispered. He means well. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was something different about her, something that flickered beneath the guilt. Maybe she'd started to see the cracks in David's perfect act. Maybe she was realizing what I had years too late. Take care of yourself, Monica, I said quietly. Before it's too late. What a very tech. She nodded once and followed him out. The house fell silent again, save for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty chairs, the untouched muffins, the indentation where his hand had rested on the table. I'd always imagined that confrontation would feel explosive, maybe even satisfying. But what I felt instead was something colder, steadier, like a line had finally been drawn in concrete. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked to my desk. The computer screen glowed faintly in the dim room. I opened my email, typed a short message, and read it over twice before hitting send. Thomas, finalize the documents. I want everything signed and sealed before the end of this week. As the whoosh of the sent email faded, I leaned back and exhaled. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt reclaimed. The morning light slanted through the blinds in neat golden stripes, dust dancing lazily in the air. My pen sat ready on the mahogany desk of Thomas Reed's office. The smell of polished wood, coffee, and faint tobacco lingered, the scent of old decisions. Thomas adjusted his glasses, shuffling through the last few pages. It's all here, Ed. The trust, the exclusion clauses, the confirmation of revocation for prior wills. Once you sign, it's done. He paused, studying me. Are you sure you want to cut them off entirely? I looked at the papers, the rows of neat, official words, so cold, so certain, and thought of the warmth I'd wasted on people who only remembered me when their bank balances got low. Forgiveness, I said, doesn't mean permission. Thomas nodded once, solemnly. Then let's do it. The fountain pen felt heavier than it should have. I took a slow breath, steadied my hand, and began signing. Each stroke was deliberate, like sealing a wound that had been open too long. The first signature felt strange, like betrayal. The second, lighter. By the third, I realized something. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was release. When I put the pen down, Thomas slid the papers together, tapping them into a neat pile. You did the right thing, he said softly. I did the only thing left, I replied. He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. Funny thing, isn't it? The older we get, the fewer things we actually own. Not just money, peace, time, dignity. People think they can borrow those too. I smiled faintly. Not anymore. Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee from the small machine in the corner, handed one to me. We drank in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. When I left his office, the autumn wind greeted me like an old friend. The courthouse square was quiet except for a few tourists taking photos near the war memorial. A gust swept through, scattering yellow maple leaves across the stone steps. One landed on my shoe. I bent down, brushed it away, and for the first time in a long while, felt light. Down by the small diner near Main Street, the smell of bacon and pancakes drifted out to meet me. I hadn't been there since Margaret was alive. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The waitress, same one from years ago, though her hair had gone gray, smiled in surprise. Well, I'll be damned, Mr. Grant. Haven't seen you since. Well, since before winter. I nodded. Been a rough season. You want the usual? Yeah, I said. And an extra plate. She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and a familiar voice called, Grandpa! Ethan came running in, helmet in hand, cheeks flushed from the cold. I had called him that morning, told him to meet me here, didn't say why. He slid into the booth across from me, still catching his breath. Wow, I haven't been here since Grandma's birthday, he said. I remember, I said. You tried to eat 4 pancakes and fell asleep halfway. He laughed, eyes bright. I was 6. I watched him for a moment. There was something about him that unguarded honesty kids still have before the world teaches them to calculate. How's school? I asked. Good. Mom says I'm getting better at math. I hesitated at the mention of Lily, then let it pass. I'm proud of you, kid. He grinned. Thanks. Mom said you've been busy with lawyer stuff? Just some paperwork, I said, making sure things are clear. The waitress arrived with 2 plates of pancakes, butter melting on top, syrup glistening. Ethan's eyes widened. Can I? Go ahead, I said. You earned it. We ate quietly for a while. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation filled the diner. Outside, the wind pushed leaves against the window like gentle reminders of time slipping by. When we finished, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. My handwriting looked old-fashioned next to his youth. What's that? He asked. A letter, I said. For you. Don't open it yet. Why? Because it's meant for when you're old enough to forget the pain and to remember the lessons. He frowned, puzzled, but nodded. Okay. Promise me you'll keep it safe. I promise. He tucked it carefully into his backpack, between a notebook and a comic book. We sat there a little longer, neither wanting to end the moment. The waitress came by with the check, smiling at us. "You two look just like the old days." I smiled back. "Feels like it too." When I stepped outside, the sun was already lowering, painting the street in amber light. Ethan waved from his bike before pedaling off down the hill, his laughter echoing faintly until it disappeared around the corner. I stood there watching until I couldn't hear him anymore. Then I turned and started walking home, my shadow stretching long across the sidewalk. Halfway there, my phone buzzed an unknown number. I didn't answer. Later that evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I saw a message notification flash across the screen. It was from an old acquaintance, a man from the local bank. "Edward, I probably shouldn't say this, but your daughter was here asking about changes to your estate file. I thought you'd want to know." I stared at the message for a long time. The tea had gone cold, so that's how it starts, I thought. The storm always comes after the calm. I looked out the window again. The wind had picked up, scattering the last of the golden leaves across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly over the hills. It didn't take long for the storm to reach my doorstep. The following afternoon, a car pulled up fast enough to send gravel flying across the driveway. I didn't even have to look. I knew the sound of that engine. Lily had arrived. The screen door slammed open before I could reach the porch. She stormed in like the wind itself, high heels clicking against the hardwood, sunglasses still on. Her face was flushed fury dressed as righteousness. "Dad!" she snapped, tossing her purse onto the couch. "What on earth did you do?" I stayed by the doorway, calm as the rain clouds building outside. "Afternoon to you too, Lily." She yanked off her glasses, eyes blazing. "Don't afternoon me! Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Monica told David. "And David called me, 'You've changed the will? You've lost your mind!'" I would not really. I walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and took a sip before answering. "No, Lily. I found it." She stared, confused. "Found what?" "My mind." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't funny. Wasn't meant to be." She crossed her arms, pacing the living room like a prosecutor. "You let Monica manipulate you. She's been trying to turn you against your own kids ever since David messed up the business. And that boy Ethan, he's just using you. You can't see it because you're old and lonely." The words hit, sharp and cold, but I'd weathered worse storms, mostly ones she created. "I'm not influenced by anyone, Lily," I said evenly. "Least of all by people who still remember how to care." She scoffed. "Care? You think cutting us out of everything is caring? Family means helping each other." I turned to face her. "I did, for 40 years. You just never helped back." The air between us stilled. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. She blinked, her confidence faltering for the first time. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's not. None of it ever was." I walked over to the old cabinet and opened a drawer. Inside was a thick folder, the same one I'd once shown to Thomas. I dropped it on the coffee table in front of her. "You want to talk about family? Let's review the records." She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were check copies, receipts, letters, my handwriting on every line. "That's from when you called crying because your car broke down," I said quietly. "The one I paid off so you could get to work." She flipped to another page. "That one's your first semester at college. And that one your trip to Europe." I remember Margaret crying over how proud she was that you'd finally see the world. Lily's lips parted, but no sound came out. I kept going, my voice steady but low. "This one's when you wanted to remodel your kitchen. $10,000. You said you'd pay it back once your design business took off." She shut the folder, trembling. "Stop it." "No," I said. "You need to hear it. Every time you said just this once, I believed you. Every time you said you'd change, I wanted to believe that too. Your mother did, right up until the day she died." Her eyes welled up, but not with remorse, I could tell. It was the panic of someone watching the ground shift under her feet. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "To us. You're our father. And you were supposed to be my daughter." The words hung there, heavy as thunder. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind tapping at the windows. Finally, she broke the silence. "What do you want from me, Dad? An apology?" I shook my head. I don't want words. I want peace. And I'm done buying it from people who sell it by the ounce. She pressed her palms to her face, then dropped them, voice shaking. You're ruining everything. Do you even know what this looks like? People will think you've gone senile. I smiled faintly. Let them. The world's full of people who confuse kindness with stupidity. I'm just correcting the record. Her phone buzzed. She looked down, eyes darting, probably David. She grabbed her purse and stood. I can't talk to you when you're like this. When I'm like what? I asked. Sober? Clear? Free? She turned away, and for a second I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who once sat on my shoulders to watch fireworks by the lake, who used to say I was her hero. But that girl had grown into someone else. Someone who couldn't see me as anything but an obstacle. Goodbye, Dad, she said, her voice brittle. I didn't answer. The door slammed. The car roared to life, gravel spitting under its tires until the sound faded into nothing. I stood by the window for a long while, watching the leaves dance in the wind. Then I turned on the TV, more for company than news. The evening anchor's voice filled the quiet room. In other news, a high-profile inheritance case in New Hampshire ended today with the court ruling in favor of the father, citing financial exploitation by his children. I leaned back in my chair, let the sound wash over me. Let them try, I murmured. The knock came just as the sky turned the color of tarnished silver, that quiet hour between day and dusk when the world holds its breath. I opened the door expecting another salesman, or worse, David. But it was Monica. She looked nothing like the woman who used to stride into family dinners wearing confidence like perfume. Her hair was tied loosely, her eyes swollen as if sleep had abandoned her for days. In her hands was a small brown envelope. Can I come in? She asked. Her voice was soft, cautious. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in, looking around the house as though the furniture might remember her better than I did. I wasn't sure you'd open the door, she said. I wasn't sure you'd knock. That made her smile just barely. She set the envelope on the table and sat down, folding her hands as though she were in church. David doesn't know I'm here, she began. And if he finds out, he'll probably never forgive me. I took my chair across from her. Sounds like a risk worth taking. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I think so too. The silence between us was heavy, but not hostile. Just the weight of too many things unsaid. Finally, she reached for the envelope and slid it toward me. There's something you need to hear. I didn't touch it. What is it? A recording. A conversation between David and his lawyer, the one who's been pushing him to challenge the will. I leaned back. Go on. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. They're planning to claim you were coerced, that you're mentally unfit, and that Thomas manipulated you. I recorded it when they were talking after dinner last week. David didn't know my phone was on the counter. She took a shaky breath. I was part of this, Ed. I encouraged him. I told him you wouldn't fight back, that you were too tired, too broken after Margaret passed. I told him he could win. The confession hung in the air like smoke. For a long time, I said nothing. I watched her hands twist together, her guilt fighting to stay contained. Finally, I asked, Why tell me now? She swallowed hard. Because I can't sleep, and because Ethan told me you took him for pancakes. That made me look up. He came home that day smiling, she said. He said you gave him a letter and called him your pride. That's not what a crazy old man does. That's what a good man does. Her voice cracked. And I've been helping destroy that man. I finally reached for the envelope, feeling the weight of it light in my hand, but heavy with consequence. Monica, I said, why would you betray your husband like this? She wiped her eyes. Because I already betrayed the wrong person once. I nodded. It was the first honest answer I'd heard from anyone in this family in a long time. Do you want me to listen to it now? She shook her head. You don't need to. You already know it's true. But send it to Thomas. He'll know what to do. I studied her face, exhausted, but peaceful in a strange way, like someone who had finally chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. You just gave me peace of mind, I said quietly. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening again. Then maybe there's still something left in me worth saving. We sat for a while without speaking, the way people do when they've said everything that matters. The rain began outside, slow, deliberate, like punctuation to a long overdue confession. When she finally stood to leave, She hesitated at the door. David won't stop, she warned. He doesn't know how to lose. I nodded. Neither do I. She gave a sad, knowing smile and walked out into the drizzle. I watched from the window as her taillights disappeared down the road. Then I turned back to the table, opened the envelope, and pulled out a small USB drive wrapped in a napkin. I plugged it into the laptop and pressed play. At first, just the murmur of voices and the clinking of glasses. Then David's voice, unmistakable. Once the will's contested, he'll cave. He hates conflict. The lawyer's voice replied, smug and certain. Just claim undue influence. It's easy. Judges eat that up when it's old people. David chuckled. Yeah, old people shouldn't have power over anything they built. They don't even know how to use online banking. I paused the recording. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. So that was what my son thought of me. Not a father, not a man. Just a relic and obstacle to clear off the board. I copied the file into a secure folder and sent it straight to Thomas with a short message. Use this wisely. The reply came within minutes. Got it. We'll be ready. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping the windows like impatient fingers. The house smelled faintly of coffee and wet leaves, the scent of endings and beginnings mixed together. For the first time, I didn't feel old. I felt awake. Some debts aren't paid in dollars, I thought. They're paid in dignity. The courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, that sterile scent of bureaucracy pretending to understand justice. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Thomas, my old friend turned guardian angel in a gray suit. Across from us, David was adjusting his tie for the third time, the nervous flick of a man who thought confidence could be ironed into fabric. Lily sat beside him, face pale, her jaw set tight enough to crack glass. Monica was in the back row, hands clasped around a tissue that had long since given up its purpose. The probate hearing began with the judge's gavel tapping once calm, almost ceremonial. Case number 1427, estate of Edward Grant, the clerk announced. It felt strange hearing my own name like that. I was still alive, but to them, I was already a file number, a property line, a sum of assets to be divided or devoured. David's lawyer, a young man with too much cologne and too little soul, stood first. Your Honor, we are contesting this will on the grounds of diminished capacity. We believe Mr. Grant was under undue influence from a third party, specifically his attorney, Mr. Reed. Thomas didn't even blink. He'd heard worse. The judge looked my way. Mr. Grant, you are here voluntarily today? I am, Your Honor, I said. More voluntarily than most people in this room. Thanks for watching. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the benches. Even the judge's mouth twitched before returning to neutrality. David shifted, clearly unamused. Proceed, the judge said. David's lawyer began parading his arguments, waving charts, quoting irrelevant medical terms. Cognitive decline, emotional instability, post-bereavement vulnerability. All fancy words to describe a father who finally said no. Then Thomas rose, smooth and steady, like a tide reclaiming shore. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to present a piece of evidence recorded by my client prior to the signing of his last will and testament. He clicked his laptop. The lights dimmed slightly as the video appeared on the large screen. There I was, the me from a few weeks ago, sitting at my kitchen table. Sunlight hitting the wooden surface, the lake shimmering behind me through the window. My voice filled the room. Calm, deliberate. This is my choice. Not out of anger, but out of truth. David turned rigid. Lily's hand froze mid-fidget. The video continued. I have loved my children more than myself. I have forgiven more than I should have. But love without respect becomes servitude, and forgiveness without change becomes permission. I'm done permitting. There was a long pause before I said the final words. This isn't revenge. It's clarity. Thomas let the silence linger after the video ended. You could hear the hum of the air vent, the scratch of a pen from the court reporter. Then he spoke quietly. Mr. Grant recorded that statement before I even met with him. No one influenced him. He influenced himself finally. David shot up from his chair. That doesn't prove anything. He's not in his right mind. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Grant, Jr., You'll have your turn. But David kept going. He's destroying our family. I looked him dead in the eye. No, son. I'm just refusing to let it destroy me. The room fell silent again. For once, David had nothing left to say. The judge exhaled slowly. The evidence is clear. The will stands as valid and enforceable. This court recognizes Mr. Edward Grant's full mental capacity and intent. The gavel struck. Once. Twice. It echoed like thunder. David's shoulders slumped. Lily's eyes glassed over, not from heartbreak, but from disbelief. The entitlement had nowhere left to go. Monica pressed the tissue to her lips, tears running freely. When our eyes met, she mouthed, "Thank you." I gave a small nod. Thomas patted my shoulder. "It's done, Ed." But he was wrong. It wasn't done. It was beginning. A few weeks later, I stood by the lake again. The water was still, mirror smooth, as if holding its breath for the next chapter. Ethan was beside me, taller than I remembered, his face bright with that earnest kind of hope only youth can afford. He jingled a set of keys. "Grandpa, are you sure about this?" "Sure enough to call it peace," I said. He smiled and walked toward the porch. The house, once my sanctuary, then my prison, looked lighter now, like it could finally breathe. He hung a small wooden sign by the door, freshly carved and painted. "The Grant House. A place for peace." I watched as he stepped back to admire it, sunlight spilling across the letters. "Think people will come?" he asked. "They will," I said. "The ones who need to." "And the maskly with not doted play," he grinned. "What about Dad and Aunt Lily?" I paused, feeling the wind shift across the water. "If they ever come," I said, "offer them tea. Not forgiveness, just tea." Ethan laughed softly. "You really mean that?" "I do. Forgiveness is too expensive to hand out like sugar packets." He nodded, thoughtful. "Then maybe that's why people will come here. To find peace that's honest." I smiled. The boy had more wisdom in him than his father ever did. We stood there in silence, the kind that feels full, not empty. The sun climbed higher, scattering light over the lake. For a moment, I saw Margaret's reflection beside mine, faint, smiling, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. Then the breeze shifted, and she was gone. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Because for the first time in my 72 years, everything was exactly where it should be. The house, the lake, the boy, the silence, all of it finally made sense. And as the light rippled across the water, I whispered not to anyone, but to life itself. Thank you for the lesson. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right